Genghis Khan is one of history's most polarizing figures. His exploits known in almost every corner of the earth due to his ruthless conquests of much of Asia and Eastern Europe during his reign in the 1200s. Him and his hordes were responsible for the deaths of millions, and many agree the Mongol Empire is the most cruel empire to ever exist. During their reign, they caused the deaths of 40 million people, 10% of the entire world's population. One of his most famous quotes is this: "The greatest happiness is to scatter your enemy, to drive him before you, to see his cities reduced to ashes, to see those who love him shrouded in tears, and to gather into your bosom his wives and daughters." Still, despite these obvious atrocities and his love for murder, many praise Genghis for his military genius and ability to overcome insurmountable odds. Love him or hate him, he was able to unite the fractured tribes of the Mongolian steppes and defeat many great empires with drastically inferior numbers. It's said that 1 in 200 people living today, his descendants. He certainly had a huge impact on the world. But if you thought his reign of terror was bad, what came after was arguably even worse. In the 13th and 14th centuries, the enormous Mongol Empire had captured half of the Eurasian landmass. At its peak, it stretched from the Pacific shores of the Korean peninsula to the cold forests of Eastern Europe. During this time, Genghis Khan's sons, and later, his descendants would wreak havoc on the world. They killed millions, established empires all over such as the Yuan dynasty of China and the city of Ukek in Russia, and wreaked havoc in the Islamic world, with Genghis Khan's grandson destroying the city of Baghdad, killing over 1 million people and single-handedly ending the Islamic Golden Age. It's safe to say these were bad guys, but in this video we want to focus on one particular descendant of Genghis Khan whose heinous actions in many ways rivaled or even exceeded his in terms of brutality and sheer destruction. His name was Timur, also known as Tamerlane the Whirlwind. This conqueror of Afghanistan, Iraq, and Central Asia, and founder of the Timurid Empire, was an undefeated commander and is widely regarded as one of the greatest military leaders and tacticians in history, as well as one of the most brutal and deadly. Born from a lesser-known noble's family with no obvious link to the Khans, this emperor would spring up out of nowhere and play a huge role in the fate of the medieval Islamic world. So, how did he do it? Well, it was the year 1336 in modern-day Uzbekistan, and Timur of the Chagatai Khanate was born. Just to give a bit of backstory of what the Chagatai Khanate was, when Genghis Khan died, he split his massive empire into 4 parts and gifted a slice to 4 of his sons. Genghis Khan's second sons, Chagatai Khanate, embraced most of Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and western Xinjiang, northern Afghanistan. His state was thus surrounded by the other 3 Mongol Khanates, the Ilkhanate to the west, the Golden Horde to the north, and the Empire of the Great Khan, also known as the Yuan dynasty, to the east. This Khanate was part of the Mongol Empire before Yuan dynasty fell in the late 14th century. Then it later became fully independent. The Khan descendants who ruled Chagatai's empire converted to Islam and changed their names. By the year 1300, soon after the death of Kublai Khan, the Chagatai Khanate was fractured, with much internal strife and civil wars between the descendants of the Khans who were now in charge. This instability created the opportunity for a young, noble son to seize control and establish one of the biggest and most successful empires the world has ever seen. Timur, who would later be known as Tamerlane the Whirlwind, was born to a lesser-known noble of the Mongol Turkish tribe known as the Barlas. On his father's side, Timur claimed to be a descendant of Tumbinai Khan, who was Genghis Khan's great-great-grandfather. He also claimed to have another, albeit weak kinship, to the Chagatai Khan bloodline, which would have made him a direct descendant of Genghis. Many historians dispute this, and to be honest, nobody knows if he was actually a descendant of Genghis, but I think in those days it would have been harder not to be related to him. Either way, Timur believed it, and his actions would certainly be like those of someone with Khan blood. In his younger years, Timur would lead a group of bandits and travel around raiding small villages and robbing travelers. Around 1363, it is believed that Timur tried to steal a sheep from a shepherd but was shot by 2 arrows, one in his right leg and another in his right hand, where he lost 2 fingers. Both injuries disabled him for life. Timur's injuries and disability gave rise to the nickname Timur the Lame, which is the origin of Tamerlane, the name by which he is generally known in the West. Although now disabled and off to a rough start, he'd bounce back. By the end of the 1360s, Timur had earned a reputation as a military leader, and he took part in campaigns in the region with the Khan of the Chagatai Khanate. Allying himself both in cause and by family connection with the Khans, he invaded Khorasan, a part of the Iranian plateau, leading a band of 1,000 horsemen. This was the second military expedition that he led, and its success led to further operations subjugating many tribes in the area. As Tamerlane was making a name for himself on the battlefield and slowly gathering more soldiers to his cause, the leader of the Chagatai Khanate died, leaving a huge power vacuum. As you can imagine, everyone with any Khan ancestry and a bit of power made a grab for the throne. A man named Tughluq Timur of Kashgar, the Khan of the eastern Chagatai Khanate, another descendant of Genghis Khan, invaded, and Tamerlane was sent to negotiate with him, but joined with him instead and was rewarded with land known as Transoxania. At about this time, his father died, and Tamerlane also became chief of the Balas. In a strange twist of fate, Timur was now the ruler of the Balas tribe and now owned a huge bit of land in the area that would be the start of what would soon become the Timurid Empire. Tughluq, now with the biggest claim to the Chagatai Khanate, betrayed Tamerlane by sending his son Ilya Koja to take Transoxania back. Tamerlane destroyed the invaders with a much smaller force, and now his rise to power would start picking up serious momentum. Hungry for power, Tamerlane claimed that the Chagatai were only figureheads and he would rule the Khanate in their name. For the most part, he did with the help of his brother-in-law, Amir Hussain. Amir, who was once a fellow fugitive and wanderer of Tamerlane, would become his equal, and together they started their conquest. However, after Amir refused to kill Ilya Koja, the son of Tughluq, who had tried to take Transoxania from him, their relationship fell apart and Tamerlane assassinated Amir. Now, with his rival Amir Hussain dead, he would marry his widowed wife, who was also a Genghis Khan descendant. This legitimized his position as official imperial ruler of the Chagatai tribe. This was not enough for Tamerlane. He wanted to become the supreme ruler of the Mongol Empire, but he faced 2 big problems. According to the Mongol laws, as he was not a direct descendant of Genghis, he couldn't be given the title of Khan. He also wanted to be the ruler of the Islamic world, but due to not being related to the Prophet Muhammad's Quraysh tribe, he couldn't claim the title of Caliph either. Instead, he used the title of Amir, meaning general, and used puppet governments to rule instead. This title wasn't enough for him, though. He wanted to be remembered as a conqueror as great as Genghis Khan was. So he created a supernatural myth around his name and gave himself the title of Sahib Kiran, which meant the Lord of Conjunction. Although not as cool as Caliph or Khan, Sahib Kiran came from an Islamic astrological prophecy and created an air of mysticism around his name. Otherwise, He depicted himself as a spiritual descendant of Ali, thus claiming the lineage of both Genghis Khan and the Quraysh. So now with power, land, and a cool title under his belt, he would start his real plans for world domination. We will go into detail about the extents of his conquests in later videos, but to summarize his conquests, he would spend the next 35 years taking over Arabia and the Islamic world, Persia, Turkey, and would even lead campaigns against India and the Ming dynasty. He battled and won against many other of Genghis Khan's Mongol descendants and had plans to take over the whole of China and even Mongolia. He wouldn't get that far, but by the time of his death, he'd capture a huge swath of land stretching from Bulgaria in the west to New Delhi in the east. It's estimated that in his 40 or so years of conquests, he'd kill over 17 million people, 5% of the world's population. He referred to himself as the Sword of Islam and converted much of his empire to the religion. Despite this, Tamerlane idolized Genghis Khan and used similar methods to build his empire. For example, he was a military mastermind who led a multi-ethnic army. He instilled great loyalty and was adept at taking advantage of temporary weaknesses in the political state of his enemies. He also used spies and propaganda to sow the seeds for invasion and planned his campaigns years in advance. These were all tactics Genghis himself had used to create his own insanely large empire. In the year 1398, and at the age of 62, Timur was now a legendary conqueror with a vast territory. He turned his army towards India in the southeast. On the way, Timur slaughtered the Pakistani and Indian people, justifying the barbarism as a holy war against the Hindu religion. The Sultan of Delhi used war elephants covered with chainmail to terrify Timur's troops. In a stroke of cruel genius, Timur placed hay on the backs of camels, set the hay on fire, and prodded them until they painfully charged at the elephants. The elephants turned and stampeded their own troops, granting Timur an easy victory. The population of Delhi were massacred. Timur's cruelty grew in his later years. Legend states that his invasion of Baghdad in 1399 required each of his soldiers to show him 2 severed heads from the largely Christian population. Tamerlane had friendly relations with some European states, namely France and Spain. Both he and the Europeans saw themselves as reluctant allies against the Ottomans. Right up until his death, Timur continued to expand his empire. The leader of the new Chinese Ming dynasty had insulted Timur, provoking his wrath. However, after 3 months of successful battles, the campaign ended when Timur succumbed to fever and died. His legacy would endure after his death and set the stage for the rise of the post-gunpowder Islamic empires, such as the Ottomans, and his descendants would even found the famous Islamic Mughal Empire of India. Tamerlane the Whirlwind was a military genius who knew how to capitalize on political strife and turn chaos into opportunity. Timur's tomb was allegedly inscribed with the words, "When I rise from the dead, the world shall tremble," and on his coffin were the words, "Whoever opens my tomb shall unleash an invader more terrible than I." And what's very interesting is that in 1941, Russian archaeologists excavated Tamerlane's tomb. 2 days later, Hitler invaded the USSR. When Timur was finally reburied, the Soviet victory at Stalingrad shortly followed. It looks like the prophecy came true. We hope you enjoyed this delve into this lesser-known but diabolical evil genius whose actions I think we can all agree rival those of the greatest conquerors. If you enjoy learning about Genghis Khan and his descendants, stick around as we'll be diving deeply into their stories in videos to come.